Hello everyone, welcome to this video demonstration of how to set up FireMon servers in your environment. In this video, we'll build out a distributed ecosystem consisting of a dedicated database server, an application server, and finally a data collector. Running through the installation wizard will be the same for each server, but the different roles are determined first by the distribution files downloaded from the FireMon User Center. On that note, let's go into the User Center and review the different types of distribution files so that you can best determine what you need for your environment. In the User Center, click on Downloads and under the Software section, click on the button that says Click here to select the correct download. You will then have a choice to download the Security Intelligence Platform, or SIP, for either the cloud-based, data collector only, or full installation. If your FireMon installation will be hosted in AWS or Azure, then the cloud variant is the option to choose. The DC-only variant is for implementations utilizing one or more standalone data collectors. The full variant is just that. It can be used for an all-in-one installation where all three roles are combined into one server, for a server with both the database and application server roles, or for completely distributed deployments where there is only one role per server. You will notice that the next section has more options to choose what type of distribution file to download. For the cloud-based variant, the distribution types are AWS and Azure. Notice that there are two intuitive options for each, either the full distribution file or the updates only. You will want to select the full version if this is a new installation or if fresh installing on a cloud instance. The update-only option is available if you are needing to upgrade your cloud instance to a newer version of the Security Intelligence Platform. For the DC-only and full install variants, the distribution types are physical hardware, update-only, virtual disk, or VM template. If you need help deciding which distribution file type is needed, you can always click on the Help Me Decide button at the top of the section. You will see that the update-only option is for any existing FMOS installation. The virtual disk image is for Linux KVM or OpenStack installations, and the VM template is for vSphere, Hyper-V, or VirtualBox installations. After selecting the appropriate variant and distribution type, you will be taken to the download screen with the corresponding file. You will see that only the two latest versions of software are available. Along with the file name and size, we have included the checksum string and recommend that you review this against the checksum of the file after downloading it onto your system. Instructions on how to do that on Windows, Linux, and macOS computers are shown in the lower portion of the page. Before installing the SIP software on your server, check one last time to ensure that the system requirements are met. If you're installing more than one server, and more importantly, if they have different system specifications, make sure you upload the correct installation file to its corresponding server. As a general rule of thumb, the database server will need large amounts of RAM, especially when reports and assessments will be generated. The application server will need large amounts of both RAM and CPU, and the data collector will need large amounts of CPU. Of course, these specs depend on the number of devices monitored on your network. Hard drive space is another consideration. During installation, the FireMon operating system, or FMOS, will run a check to ensure there's at least 480 gigabytes. If 480 gigs are not available on the system, the only role the server can take is that of the data collector. It is important to note that for VMs on versions prior to 9.5, regardless of the disk size allotted, only 250 gigs will be used by the system. The only way around this is to create an extra virtual disk at the time of creation. This cannot be done after implementation. Starting in version 9.5.0, however, the resize disk command can be used to properly configure partition space after creation of the server. After installing FMOS, the installation wizard will begin working its magic. The first step is to read the end user license agreement, and if you agree, we can move forward. On the next page, you will be entering the basic network configurations including the host and domain names, interfaces, and time setting. For the host name and domain name, it's preferred to use all lowercase letters, although capital letters are acceptable. And keep in mind that you will not be able to change the host name once it's initially set up. Moving on, the next page is the organizational information. Enter the admin name, department, city, state or province, and the two-letter acronym for the country. This data is important as the X509 certificates are generated using them, and it helps us when performing searches for diagnostic packages. On the next page, you will be creating a local admin user. As the name implies, these credentials will allow access even if there are problems with connectivity to an authentication server. These credentials are for FMOS only, so they will grant access to the FMOS web console and the command line interface, but they will not grant access to the Security Manager console. You will also be using these credentials to join servers into the ecosystem. It would be beneficial to record this information for reference if needed in the future. The following page is for the mail options, where you can configure whether an SMTP relay will be used or not. This page can be skipped for now, as these settings can be revisited through the web control panel. The last configuration page is where you can select the type of server deployment. The first option, or single server, is just that. It will be the one server that does it all, performing all functions within the Security Intelligence platform without the need for any other FireMon servers. The second option is existing deployment, which allows you to add servers after the initial server has been created. This could be for additional database, application, or data collector servers, depending on the schema previously decided upon with your sales team. Finally, the new deployment option is for creating a completely new ecosystem, beginning with either a single database server or a server that is both a database and application server. Now, if a dedicated database server is desired, then you will want to select database only. As a reminder, the FireMon servers follow a hierarchical structure with the database server at the top, the application server next, and the data collector at the bottom of the structure. The first server that needs to be built in a distributed deployment, such as the deployment we're working on, needs to be the database server as it's at the top of the hierarchy. Lastly, the system will prompt you to review the information you have entered. Make sure all the settings configured are correct, as many of them cannot be changed unless you restart the install process. If changes are needed now, simply scroll down using the arrow keys on your keyboard and select back to return to the corresponding page. If you have not done so, now would be the perfect time to record the inputted data before pressing that finish button. Now that our servers are set up, we can log into each one via CLI using the local FMOS credentials. The first page we see is the FMOS main boot up screen. When the servers first stood up, there will be several messages regarding what the system is doing, including that the initial deployment is still in progress. Once it settles down some, there may be a couple messages left that can be taken care of at a later time. At this point, we can press Alt F6 in Windows to get to the virtual console. Now, if you ever need to go back to the boot up screen, press Alt F1. And if you need the rescue console, that can be accessed with Alt F9. For all you Mac users out there, the keys are Function, Control, F1, F6, or F9. Now it's time to join the application server to the database server, then the data collector to the application server. There are a couple commands we can run at this point. The first is fmos health, which will help us make sure there are no system errors that will keep us from proceeding. The other is to run a cat on the fm_roles file located in the /etc/FireMon directory. This will ensure there are no roles already associated with the server. When we are certain we are on the correct server and there are no issues or roles assigned, we can use the fmos ecosystem join command. We need to make sure that we add the fully qualified domain name of the server we are joining to at the end of the command. The first message seen states that the server we are joining does not recognize the certificate authority and prompts us to accept the certificate fingerprint presented. We can verify the fingerprint of the cert on the server we are joining to by issuing the command listed. When joining the application server to the database server, we'll be prompted for the FMOS username and password of the database server. Since we're joining to a database server, the only option will be to assign the role of an application server. Now, there are separate instructions for joining additional database servers for redundancy, but that process will not be covered in this video. We will select Yes to make this an application server, and then the join process begins. When the process finishes, we can run the cat command on the fm roles file once again to see the application server role now assigned. With the application server now acknowledging its role, we are able to log into the Security Manager web console. This is where we as users will be spending the majority of our time in FireMon, as it's a single pane of glass by which security operations are monitored, policies are tested, reports are configured, and of course, much more. In order to log into the Security Manager, open a web browser and type the IP address of the application server as the URL to connect via HTTPS. The supported browsers are Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome, Internet Explorer 11, Microsoft Edge, and Apple Safari. The login credentials are FireMon as the username with all lowercase letters, and the password is the MAC address of the system in all lowercase letters as well, without any colons. After the initial login, the console will then prompt for a new password to be created. Speaking of web consoles, each server, regardless of its role, has its own FMOS web control panel that can be used to make changes on that specific server, such as those SMTP configurations we skipped before. This web console can be accessed also using the IP address of the server, but this time we will connect using 55555 as the port. The credentials created earlier for the local FMOS admin user work here as well. Here you can change several aspects of the server, including the local admin user password, network settings, authentication, as well as perform functions such as disk cleanup and create diagnostic packages. Finally, our last step in the process is to join the data collector. The process will almost be the same as joining the application server. One difference is that the data collector will be joining the application server and not the database server. The other difference is that along with the FMOS credentials for the application server, we are also prompted for the Security Manager credentials. Once the join has finished here, run that cat command on the fm roles file one last time to verify the server accepted its role. And we're done here. The next step after installation is to install a license from User Center onto the application server and begin to configure the devices to be monitored. In conclusion, let's discuss the highlights of the install process. The installation distribution files can be found in the FireMon User Center and will vary depending on your current environment as well as on the needed ecosystem deployment. Make sure your servers are up to spec and the distribution files are uploaded to the correct servers. The installation wizard is intuitive and relatively painless. Our recommendation is to take note of the different inputs such as the organizational information and the local admin data. When determining the server roles in the wizard, single server means all-in-one machine that takes on all the roles. Existing deployment is for any additional servers after the first database server has been created. New deployment is for deploying the first server, which will be a database and application server, or database only is for the first server, which will be a dedicated database server. Joining a server to the ecosystem simply requires the fmos ecosystem join command along with the fqdn of the server above it in the hierarchy. Logging into fmos will require the credentials inputted for the local user in the wizard, but logging into the Security Manager console requires the FireMon username and the MAC address of the application server without colons. For more detailed installation instructions, visit the FireMon User Center and click on FireMon Product Documentation.